When we usually talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there is a certain comfort we expect from it.
Right, a demand for precision.
Exactly. Like if you shatter your collarbone, the X-ray gives you this jagged, undeniable white line in the dark. The doctor points right to it and says, there is the fracture. It's visible. It's categorical.
The pain has a geography you can literally point to. It's entirely binary. I mean, the bone is broken or it is whole. The cells are benign or they are malignant.
Yeah.
And we crave that clinical certainty, because if a wound can be isolated, we believe it can be managed. We want our suffering to adhere to a strict logical architecture.
But when you cross the threshold into the realm of neurodevelopment or, into the architecture of trauma, into the deep, often terrifying labyrinth of the human psyche, that X-ray machine just completely shatters.
It does. It absolutely does.
We suddenly find ourselves navigating a diagnostic landscape that is entirely opaque. We are dealing with invisible phantom wounds, and these are wounds that dictate literally everything from how desperately we love to how relentlessly we torture ourselves.
And that opacity, well, that is the absolute defining characteristic of psychoanalysis. It is the science of the unseen. And that is exactly the territory we are mapping out today for you.
Right, so welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is intensely emotional and honestly a bit daunting. We are going to explore the vast, shifting landscape of the human soul through an extraordinary text. It's called Des Historias de Vida, Sofrimento y Amor, which translates to 10 Stories of Life, Suffering, and Love by the renowned psychoanalyst J.D. Nasio.
And the origin of these specific accounts is vital to understanding their power. These were not initially drafted as sterile academic case studies meant to be buried in some peer-reviewed medical journal, just for a handful of specialists.
No, not at all.
They're a collection of 10 profoundly moving clinical narratives that were originally spoken aloud. They were broadcast on French radio, specifically on France Inter. Nasio was bringing the darkest, most intimate corners of the human mind right into the public square.
I love that. They were crafted to be heard, to resonate with the everyday person, commuting to work or just sitting in their kitchen, revealing how our hidden minds completely govern our reality.
Exactly. And the tone of this work is staggering. It demands a kind of solemn reverence. I mean, it is deeply persuasive. But more than that, it is overwhelmingly empathetic. It treats the agonizing struggles of these 10 individuals with a profound respect for the gravity of human suffering.
It really does. And to set the stage for our exploration today, there is a truly provocative quote from the book's introduction. Nasio aligns his work with an inscription by the French poet Paul Valéry, suggesting that the book is essentially a dormant object.
Yeah.
It only springs into existence when a human mind engages with it.
Right.
The quote reads, "Whether I speak or stay silent depends on you, reader, so do not enter without desire."
That is it's a gauntlet thrown down before the audience. It strips away the illusion that you can be a passive consumer of another person's psychological pain.
Yeah, you can't just spectate.
Precisely. To truly understand the mechanics of these tormented minds, you have to bring your own vulnerability to the table. You have to bring your own willingness to look into the psychological mirror, recognizing that the dysfunctions we are going to discuss are not alien phenomena.
No. They're inside us, too.
Yes, they are extreme manifestations of the exact same unconscious drives that operate in all of us.
So we are going to trace the intellectual and emotional arc of this work for you. We will explore the paralyzing grip of invisible terrors, the mind's ability to hallucinate its own physical form, the excruciating torment of self-inflicted guilt.
The counterintuitive architecture of romantic love, too.
Right. And the devastating, unyielding weight of grief. And ultimately, we will arrive at a profoundly moving philosophy about how we might finally make peace with the wounded, terrified versions of ourselves we try so desperately to outgrow.
And this journey, well, it begins in a very specific, meticulously curated physical space. The environment where these invisible wounds are coaxed into the light is not accidental. Nasio introduces us to his consulting room, a space he deliberately conceptualizes as the garden of the unconscious.
I have to say, this completely upended my preconceived notion of a psychoanalyst's office.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, you hear the word psychoanalysis and you immediately picture a claustrophobic, dimly lit room, right? Heavy velvet curtains blocking out the street, floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves groaning under the weight of medical tomes, and that severe, rigid leather couch.
The classic Freudian setup.
Exactly. It feels heavy. But Nasio's room is an exercise in light. He describes this vast, sun-drenched expanse, Cream-colored walls, a travertine marble fireplace, a soft salmon-toned carpet that absorbs sound.
It sounds beautiful.
It does. There's a massive table bathed in sunlight, a small table on wheels specifically for children, a Bruegel painting teeming with vibrant, chaotic village life, and a reproduction of a Mark Rothko painting saturated in vivid, pulsing yellow and lilac.
And the psychology of that space is deeply intentional, you know? The Rothko painting is particularly telling. Rothko's work is not about logic or form. It is about pure, overwhelming emotional resonance.
Right.
By creating a room that feels like a sanctuary of light and warmth, Nasio is attempting to disarm the patient's immediate conscious defenses. The environment itself must communicate an absolute unconditional safety before the patient will even consider relinquishing their protective armor.
That makes total sense. However, the true revelation of his methodology isn't his choice of carpeting or art, is it?
No, it's not.
It is his radically active, almost aggressive intervention when treating severe phobias. And I always pictured the analyst as this silent, impassive figure sitting behind the patient's head, occasionally uttering a non-committal hum.
Right, the blank slate.
Yeah. But Nasio shatters that stereotype entirely when he encounters a young boy named Mathieu. Mathieu suffers from a school phobia so severe, so physically debilitating, that he simply cannot cross the threshold of the school gates without descending into a state of absolute physiological panic.
And to understand Nasio's intervention here, we first have to understand his structural diagnosis of the phobia itself. A phobia is almost never actually about the object of the fear.
Okay, wait, really?
Yes. The school building, the classroom, the teachers, they are entirely irrelevant in this case. They're merely a psychological mask.
A mask for a much deeper, more primal terror.
Right, precisely. Consciously, Mathieu experiences a suffocating dread of the school environment. But unconsciously, the phobia is a manifestation of an unbearable terror of separation. Mathieu is suffering the absolute primal agony of leaving his mother's side.
Oh, wow.
The school is just the first institutional mandate that forces that separation. The child's dread of the outside world is actually a displaced, projected fear of losing the ultimate life-sustaining safety of the maternal bond.
So the fear isn't, I am terrified of the classroom. The fear is, if I detach from my mother, I will cease to exist. And recognizing this, Nasio doesn't just sit Mathieu on the salmon carpet and ask him to describe his nightmares. He physically leaves the sanctity of his yellow and lilac room. He steps into the chaotic reality of the patient.
He does.
At 8 o'clock in the morning, Nasio is sitting in the passenger seat of Mathieu's father's car. Mathieu is trembling in the back seat with his father, and they have even brought the family cat along for the ride.
It is an almost surreal tableau, isn't it? You have a world-renowned intellectual and elite psychoanalyst sitting in a mundane family sedan with a house cat driving through morning traffic to a middle school.
It's incredible. So they park near the school. As the gates begin to close, the three of them, the father, the analyst, and Mathieu, who's physically clinging to this catwalk, up to the iron fence. Mathieu is rigid, frozen in sheer terror.
And what does Nasio do?
Nasio instructs him to grab the cold iron bars of the gate. He tells him to hold on and simply breathe. He physically anchors the boy to the object of his terror and guides him through the physiological storm of the panic attack in real time. He instructs the father to repeat this exact exposure twice a week.
Yeah.
And slowly, agonizingly, it works. Mathieu eventually manages to walk into the library and weeks later, back into the classroom.
Nasio is fundamentally redefining the borders of psychoanalytic practice here. He posits that the role of the analyst is deeply fluid. There are moments when the analyst must be the archaeologist, patiently excavating the buried traumas of the unconscious.
Right.
But there are other moments when you must be a psychotherapist, actively soothing a volatile, immediate conflict. And in moments of crisis, standing at the iron gates of a middle school, you must become a direct physical guide, managing the somatic explosion of panic.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Nasio is acting like a director here, stepping into the real world with Mathieu. Is psychoanalysis just about talking on a couch, or is it this active emotional reconstruction? Because it sounds like he is physically walking the patient back into the past.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. The physical location of the school gate seems almost secondary. The real geography they are navigating is Mathieu's internal timeline. Nasio is physically standing on a sidewalk in the present, but psychologically, he is holding the hand of a terrified infant who is entirely convinced his mother is dissolving into the ether.
That duality of presence is so essential. And that mechanism, the fear of the outside world masking a primal fear of abandonment, brings us to the tragic reality of adult phobias, doesn't it?
It does. It is perfectly encapsulated in the story of Ines.
Right. Ines, her world has shrunk to the square footage of her apartment. She is suffering from an agoraphobia so profound that she is literally a prisoner of her own home. She cannot walk to the corner store. She cannot navigate a crowded street.
The isolation is absolute.
Yeah. To even attend her sessions with Nasio, she requires an escort, usually her husband or a neighbor, shielding her from the sheer vastness of the open world.
And Nasio argues that just as Mathieu's school phobia masks separation anxiety, adult phobias are invariably echoes. They're repetitions of a traumatized, abandoned child's fear. When you conduct a deep archaeological dig into the history of a severely phobic adult, you almost universally uncover a brutal, premature, and unprocessed separation in their early infancy.
And the history with Denise is just devastating. She was abandoned by her biological mother when she was merely 3 months old.
3 months.
3 months. The mother left her in the care of a babysitter and simply vanished.
Yeah.
Never returned. So when Denise looks out at a wide open avenue, she isn't seeing a street.
No.
She is unconsciously re-experiencing the boundless, terrifying void that a 3-month-old infant feels when they realize the primary source of their existence is permanently gone. The open space is the physical manifestation of abandonment.
And the clinical breakthrough with Ines does not come from intellectual analysis. It doesn't come from just talking. It comes from an event of sheer crisis, leading to a profound empathetic resonance.
What happens?
Ines receives a formal eviction notice. She is going to lose her apartment. To Ines, this apartment was not just real estate. It was her womb, her absolute safe haven, the only barrier between her and the void.
Oh, that's catastrophic for her.
Exactly. The impending loss of this space causes her to completely fragment during a session. And as she is breaking down, Nasio experiences a phenomenon he terms a common revivification.
I found this concept incredibly demanding of the therapist. What exactly is happening in the analyst's mind during a common revivification?
Well, it requires the analyst to abandon their clinical detachment entirely. Nasio does not merely observe Ines sobbing as a symptom to be categorized. He allows his own neurological architecture to synchronize with her despair.
He feels it with her.
Yes, he closes his eyes and vividly, viscerally imagines the 3-month-old infant version of Ines. He pictures the baby sobbing in a crib until she loses consciousness from sheer exhaustion, bathed in the horrific realization of maternal absence. Nasio allows himself to feel the suffocating, crushing gravity of that infant's absolute despair. And then, speaking with infinite gentleness, he articulates exactly what he's witnessing in his mind's eye. He gives voice to the infant's silent trauma.
Wow. So he takes the present-day panic over an eviction notice and anchors it directly to the trauma of the crib.
Yes. And for Ines, hearing her deepest, most inarticulate pre-verbal terror suddenly spoken aloud by another human being, a human being who is visibly, genuinely carrying the emotional weight of that terror alongside her, it shatters the isolation of the phobia.
Because she's not alone in the void anymore.
Precisely. The trauma is no longer a solitary confinement. It is a shared experience in the present moment, and that shared reality demystifies the terror. Following that session, the suffocating grip of her agoraphobia begins to rapidly dissolve.
It is a remarkable testament to radical empathy. I mean, the paralyzing fear of the physical world outside is dismantled only by walking directly into the agonizing fear buried inside.
It's a journey inward.
And that distortion of geography, from the terror of the open street to the terror of one's own physical boundaries, leads us to an even more harrowing landscape in the book. We shift from how the mind perceives the world to how the mind perceives its own flesh.
Right. We must confront the devastating pathology of mental anorexia. Nasio details the case of Angela, a 21-year-old engineering student of immense intellect.
And when she first crosses the threshold of his office, brought in by her terrified parents following a recent clinical hospitalization, the physical reality of her body is deeply alarming.
It is. She stands at 1.70 meters, about 5'7", and weighs a mere 43 kilograms, which is roughly 94 pounds.
She is existing in a state of severe, life-threatening emaciation. And yet, the tragedy of her condition is that she is absolutely unshakably certain that she is grossly obese.
Nasio deconstructs the architecture of mental anorexia here, outlining 3 distinct, interlocking dysfunctions. The first is emotional, an absolute visceral terror of accumulating flesh, of gaining weight.
Okay, the fear.
Yes. The second is cognitive, an invasive, obsessive, unrelenting loop of thought dedicated entirely to the mechanics of losing weight. But the third dysfunction is the most profoundly destabilizing to witness. It is a literal hallucinatory double perception of the physical body.
That hallucinatory aspect is what completely changes the paradigm here, because there's a scene in the book that is just searing. Angela is sitting in the chair, agonizing over the unbearable weight of her quote-unquote fat.
Right.
And Nasio realizes that debating her is useless. So he asks her to stand. He guides her into the hallway of his office where there is a massive full-length mirror. They stand side by side, staring into the reflection, and he speaks to her with complete calm, asking, "Angela, please show me exactly where you think you are fat."
And the clinical observation here is crucial. How does her mind force her body to respond?
She reaches down to her own thigh. She pinches a section of completely atrophied, wasted muscle that is clinging to the bone. She holds this practically non-existent tissue, looks Nasio dead in the eye, and says, "Look, doctor, I need to eliminate all this fat."
It's chilling.
It is. And Nasio is visibly taken aback. He gently corrects her, "But Angela, those are your muscles." She rejects his reality instantly and completely. "No," she insists, "it's mounds of fat that I cannot get rid of."
This exchange perfectly illustrates the chasm between a common neurotic insecurity and a psychotic-level hallucination occurring within a non-psychotic structure. Angela is not employing hyperbole. She is not fishing for a compliment.
No, she literally sees it.
Yes, when she looks at her starving skeletal frame, her visual cortex is literally hallucinating cascading rolls of fat. But Nasio's therapeutic maneuver in this moment is brilliant in its restraint. He knows that applying logic to a hallucination is like trying to stop a flood with a chain-link fence. The hallucination will just flow right through it. Instead of arguing, he steps into her distorted reality. He says, "All right, Angela, let us meet back at this exact mirror in 3 weeks, and we will see if these rolls of fat have melted."
Oh, wow. He validates her perceived reality in order to establish a bridge of trust. He has to join her in the delusion to slowly guide her out of it.
Precisely.
But why is her mind executing this horrific distortion? What is the unconscious objective of starving the body to the point of systemic failure?
Well, when we examine the wider psychological landscape of family dynamics, Nasio reveals that at the absolute core of Angela's anorexia is a vehement, unconscious rejection of femininity, and specifically of motherhood.
Rejection of motherhood.
Yes. In the unconscious framework of many anorexic patients, the mature adult female body, the body of the mother, is a site of horror. It is perceived as soft, exhausted by the toll of pregnancies, and fundamentally subservient to the patriarchal structure of the family. The anorexic is consumed by the terror of morphing into that docile, drained, subjugated maternal figure.
So the starvation is actually a weapon. By systematically eradicating her breasts, her hips, every curve of her body, she is eradicating the biological markers of her destiny. She shuts down her endocrine system, halting her menstrual cycle. She is utilizing severe malnutrition as a tool to freeze time, to completely arrest her biological development.
That is exactly what has happened, and Nasio uncovers an even deeper layer of this specific rejection. He asks Angela to simply draw a sketch of her ideal physical form.
And the resulting drawing is a chilling clinical artifact, isn't it?
Extremely. She hands him a piece of paper containing only a head, and descending from the neck are 2 perfectly straight, rigid, parallel lines ending at the floor. There is no waist, no hips, no suggestion of gender. It is an architecture of pure, unyielding linearity.
Nasio looks at it and remarks that it resembles the body of an adolescent boy. And Angela doesn't deny it. She actively embraces the observation.
Right.
She confesses that her entire life, she has harbored this desperate wish to be the son her father never possessed. She reminisces about helping him in his study, going on long cycling trips where it's just the two of them. Her unconscious goal is to become an androgynous perpetual boy, thereby achieving a perfect, unbroken alignment with her father, while completely evading the grim fate she associates with her mother.
Her illness is a catastrophic, desperate attempt to physically sculpt a new identity through the systematic destruction of her own flesh.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, for you listening. Nasio pulls back the lens from this extreme pathology to make a point that implicates every single one of us. He says we all distort our bodies.
You do.
When we don't love ourselves, we make ourselves ugly in our minds. It's like we all walk around with a funhouse mirror in our heads, just less extreme than Angela's.
That is a highly accurate way to conceptualize it. Nasio's assertion is that objective self-perception is a myth. Our reflection is always refracted through the prism of our emotional history. The gaze of those who cherished us softens our reflection, while the wounds inflicted by those who rejected or humiliated us magnify our perceived deformities.
So the mirror isn't neutral.
Not at all. If your internal architecture feels unloved, your mirror will obediently reflect a topography of flaws that are entirely invisible to anyone else. The hallucinatory extreme of the anorexic is simply the furthest point on a spectrum of distortion that we all inhabit every day.
I completely buy that. Our minds are incredibly adept at forging these alternate realities to match our emotional injuries. And this realization that the mind can hallucinate physical fat to avoid a biological destiny prepares us for an even darker mechanism.
Yes, it does.
What happens when the mind doesn't distort the body, but rather distorts its own thoughts, hallucinating pure, unadulterated guilt? This brings us to the agonizing story of Muriel.
The psychological torment Muriel endures is perhaps the most difficult to read in the entire collection. Yet it is a masterclass in understanding the punitive nature of the unconscious. Muriel is a loving mother to a vibrant, healthy 2-year-old boy named Gabriel. But when she arrives in Nasio's office, she is a woman in absolute ruins.
She's just been discharged from the psychiatric facility, right?
Yes, a weeks-long stay. Because she is plagued by an obsession that defies all maternal instinct.
And it's so specific. Every single evening, after the mundane routine of picking Gabriel up from his daycare, they return to their apartment. They have a ritual of sitting on the living room rug, playing with his small toy cars right next to a large, expansive glass window. And the second she sits on that rug, her consciousness is violently hijacked. She enters a terrifying, dissociated reality where she is overcome by a vivid, incredibly detailed, almost magnetic urge to grab her toddler, lift him over the window ledge, and drop him to the street below.
She is living in mortal terror of her own mind. She is convinced that she is harboring a dormant monster, that she is an abomination destined to murder her own child. In clinical psychiatric terms, this specific torment is known as an impulsion phobia.
The terminology there, impulsion, makes it sound as though she is teetering on the edge of actually committing the act. It sounds like the child is in imminent physical danger.
And addressing that fear is Nasio's very first, most critical intervention. He looks at this shattered, terrified woman in their initial session and states with absolute authority, "You are not going to harm your child. You are incapable of hurting a fly."
But she fights him on that, doesn't she?
Fiercely. Muriel fiercely resists this absolution. She is desperate for him to recognize the danger she poses. But Nasio explains the structural difference between psychosis and neurosis. If she were psychotic, her grip on reality would be fundamentally fractured, and she might indeed act upon a delusion.
Right.
But Muriel is suffering from a severe obsessional neurosis. Her moral framework and her reality testing are completely intact, but they are being mercilessly bombarded by a rogue, obsessive thought. The pathology is entirely contained within the realm of thought, not action.
So the sickness isn't a desire to murder her son. The sickness is that her brain forces her to imagine murdering her son, subjecting her to the maximum possible emotional agony.
Exactly.
But the burning question is why? Why would a mother's own neurological machinery subject her to the most grotesque, torturous imagery imaginable?
To understand the architecture of this specific guilt, Nasio must excavate her childhood. He discovers that Muriel has possessed an obsessional, ritualistic structure since she was a little girl. She was preoccupied with death and magical thinking.
Oh, like childhood superstitions.
Extreme ones. At 7 years old, if she accidentally bumped her right hand against a table, she felt an overwhelming compulsion to tap her left hand in the exact same way. If she failed to perform this balancing ritual, she believed her father would instantly die.
Oh, wow.
This indicates a mind deeply concerned with balancing invisible ledgers and warding off catastrophe through self-imposed rules.
But the true genesis of the impulsion phobia lies in a profound, foundational family tragedy. Muriel was conceived and born exactly 1 year after her parents suffered the devastating loss of her older brother who died during childbirth.
This is the crux of the pathology. Muriel is what psychoanalytic literature refers to as a replacement child. The psychological burden placed upon a replacement child, even when entirely unspoken by the parents, is astronomically heavy.
Because they're filling a void.
Yes. From the moment she drew her first breath, Muriel was engulfed in an unconscious atmosphere of grief and substitution. She grew up carrying a monumental, irrational survivor's guilt. Her unconscious mind concluded that her very existence was predicated on her brother's demise. She survived, he perished, and therefore she usurped his rightful place in the family. She feels she is a thief who stole a life that did not belong to her.
That is a staggering, invisible burden to carry into adulthood. And now she has achieved everything. She has a loving husband, a stable wife, and most importantly, she has Gabriel. She has created life. She is experiencing an outpouring of profound, radiant joy.
But
But her unconscious mind, which operates like a ruthless, unyielding accountant still balancing the books of her dead brother, registers an alert. The ledger is unbalanced. The unconscious says, wait, you are a usurper. You do not have the right to this immaculate happiness. You stole your existence, and therefore this joy is illegitimate.
precisely. The sheer velocity of her happiness triggers a catastrophic punitive response. Nasio utilizes a vivid, visceral metaphor to illuminate the precise mechanics of her self-torture.
The bridge metaphor.
Yes. He asks Muriel to visualize herself standing on a high bridge spanning a turbulent, rushing river. In her hand, she holds a priceless, irreplaceable jewel, her son, Gabriel. She extends her arms, holding the jewel directly over the roaring water, subjecting herself to pure, unadulterated, heart-stopping terror that her fingers might slip and she might drop him.
So what does this all mean? Why subject yourself to the terror of the bridge at all? Why not just hold the jewel safely against her chest?
Because the terror is the payment. The torment is the safety net. She must relentlessly terrify herself with the horrific image of dropping him in order to guarantee that she never will.
Oh, I see.
By casting herself in the role of a monstrous potential murderer, she inflicts a punishment so severe that it offsets the crime of her happiness. If she is enduring unimaginable daily psychological agony, then she is paying the agonizing tax for her brother's death. And as long as she pays that tax in suffering, her unconscious allows her to keep her son alive.
It shows how the mind will literally torture itself to balance an unconscious ledger. She imagines herself as a monster to punish herself for being happy. She hallucinates her own monstrousness so she doesn't have to face the unbearable, quote-unquote, undeserved lightness of simply loving her child.
And while Muriel's impulsion phobia is an extreme, debilitating clinical manifestation, Nasio uses her story as a mirror to reflect back upon the reader. He argues that the underlying mechanics of her self-punishment are not an anomaly.
We all do it.
We do. The compulsive need to sabotage our own happiness, to balance our internal ledgers through guilt and anxiety, is the fundamental architecture of the neurotic mind, and that encompasses almost everyone.
Which transitions us perfectly into the mechanics of neurosis itself. Muriel's extreme case forces us to look in the mirror because, as the author argues, we all share these neurotic traits. To illustrate the everyday, grinding reality of neurosis, he introduces us to a 10-year-old girl named Lucia.
And Lucia's story straddles the line between dark comedy and profound psychological boundary violation.
It really does. Lucia is brought to the clinic by her mother, and the mother is a walking embodiment of a severe, intrusive, hypochondriacal obsession. During the intake, the mother casually reveals a horrifying daily routine. She takes Lucia's temperature rectally, 4 times a single day, every single day.
4 times a day.
She is consumed by a tyrannical paranoia that her daughter might be harboring an invisible fever.
And Nasio, trying to intervene on behalf of the child's physical autonomy, asks the mother to bring in her thermometers. The woman arrives at the next session with a literal makeup bag, unzipping to reveal a stash of 40 different thermometers. 40.
It's unbelievable.
Nasio attempts to negotiate a truce. He suggests using a modern infrared forehead thermometer to stop the relentless physical invasion of the child's body, and the mother's response is pure, chaotic denial.
She grabs the scanner, right?
Yes, she grabs the forehead scanner and begins frantically zapping Lucia's forehead, then her own forehead, and then Nasio's forehead, right there in the consulting room, triumphantly declaring that the fluctuating numbers prove the device is entirely unreliable and that her invasive method is the only path to the truth.
It is an absurd, almost slapstick scene playing out in a psychoanalyst's office. But beneath the absurdity is the tragic reality of repeated daily microtraumas. The mother's anxiety completely overrides Lucia's bodily sovereignty.
Exactly.
It is precisely this kind of suffocating, inescapable environmental pressure that slowly forges a neurotic personality structure in a child. And Nasio utilizes this chaotic dynamic to outline a grand, unified theory of neurosis, breaking it down into 6 interconnected dysfunctions.
Let's weave through these dysfunctions because I guarantee that anyone listening will recognize the ghosts of their past relationships or their current anxieties in this framework. Nasio paints a portrait of a person who is perpetually out of sync with reality.
Right. Dysfunction number 1.
It begins with a chronic, aching dissatisfaction fueled by impossible dreams. The neurotic is allergic to the present moment. They harbor a flawless, idealized fantasy in their mind. And because reality is inherently messy and flawed, reality is always a disappointment. They actually derive more comfort from the longing for a perfect future than they do from experiencing a good enough present.
Yes, the fantasy is safe while the reality is threatening. And this dissatisfaction is invariably paired with the second dysfunction, a deeply negative self-image.
Which is fascinating because the neurotic is intensely self-obsessed, but the obsession is entirely punitive. The phobic individual fixates on their humiliating dependence. The obsessive fixates on their perceived clumsiness or moral failing. The hysteric fixates on their gullibility in matters of the heart. It is an exhausting narcissism built entirely upon a foundation of self-loathing.
And because they loathe themselves, they assume everyone else will eventually reach the same conclusion. That triggers the third dysfunction, a perpetual vibrating anxiety of being abandoned or humiliated. Even when a partner is sitting right next to them, demonstrating absolute devotion, the neurotic mind is busy manufacturing a betrayal.
They operate on the assumption that love is fragile and temporary. They love me today, but tomorrow they will see the real me and vanish.
And this unbearable tension, the self-loathing and the terror of abandonment, inevitably boils over into the fourth dysfunction, which Nasio refers to as bursts of perversion.
But he is not speaking of clinical criminal perversion here.
Right. He means manipulating others.
Yeah.
It's those dark moments where we strip the people we love of their humanity and use them as instruments for our own emotional regulation. Like using your spouse as an emotional punching bag because you had a terrible day at work. Or intentionally provoking a vicious argument just to force them to react, to prove that they still care enough to yell at you.
Exactly. It's treating a human being as a pressure valve, and the moment that pressure valve is released, the fifth dysfunction crashes down, crushing, overwhelming guilt.
Over the perversion.
Yes. The neurotic observes the wreckage of the manipulative outbursts, and the self-loathing is validated. I am a monster. I am destroying the person I love. I do not deserve them.
Which necessitates the sixth and final dysfunction, the adoption of a pleasant, fabricated facade. Terrified that the partner will finally leave after seeing the quote-unquote monster, the neurotic overcompensates. They become excessively accommodating, sickly sweet, or hyper-independent, building a false persona to hide the guilt and ensure the partner's continued presence.
And then, feeling suffocated by their own fake persona, the dissatisfaction builds again, and the cycle violently restarts.
It is an exhausting, closed-loop system. But Nasio's most profound insight is identifying the engine that powers this cycle. He traces the origin of all neurosis back to a childhood fantasy.
And in psychoanalysis, a fantasy is not a whimsical daydream. It is a rigid, crystallized photo memory of a primal trauma.
Like a snapshot of the worst moment.
Yes. It could be a massive singular event, or it could be the accumulation of 1,000 microtraumas, like Lucia enduring the daily invasion of the 40 thermometers. Nasio explains that this foundational trauma acts like an internal puppet show. In this frozen photo memory, there are only two characters available to play: the omnipotent villain who inflicts suffering, and the paralyzed, helpless victim who endures it.
So if neurosis is fueled by a childhood fantasy or a photo memory, it implies we're all just playing out unconscious puppet shows from our past where someone is the victim and someone is the villain.
As adults, neurotics are entirely hostage to this ancient script. Whenever a moment of stress or vulnerability arises in a modern relationship, the unconscious mind instantly beats up the childhood puppet show.
We aren't reacting to our partners, we're reacting to ghosts. If your spouse is 20 minutes late for dinner, your brain doesn't think traffic is bad. Your unconscious casts your spouse in the role of the ancient, abandoning villain and casts you as the helpless, discarded child.
That projection is the tragedy of neurosis. We superimpose the archaic trauma onto the pristine reality of the present.
And if neurosis dictates our fears and manipulations, it also fundamentally dictates how we love. Which brings us to a fascinating exploration of romance in Chapter 5. Nasio tackles the concept of love within a couple, and he refuses to define it as a singular, pure emotion. Instead, he conceptualizes love as a complex, multifaceted bouquet composed of 12 distinct, often contradictory flowers.
Before he catalogs the bouquet, though, he synthesizes love into a dual definition that is both biological and deeply philosophical. He argues that love is first an absolute vital biological necessity, which he terms amancia.
Amancia, the drive to attach.
Yes. This is the primal cellular drive to physically and emotionally attach to another body, echoing the infant's absolute need to attach to the mother for survival. But love is also a profound, magnificent illusion.
Calling love an illusion sounds incredibly cynical at first glance.
It sounds cynical, but it is structurally necessary. The illusion is the deeply buried, unconscious promise that this specific, flawed human being will somehow fulfill all of our historical lacks, heal all of our childhood wounds, and provide total, unblemished happiness.
Even though we know that's impossible.
Right. Rationally, our prefrontal cortex knows that no mortal human can serve as a perpetual motion machine of happiness. Yet, we attach to them with the absolute irrational expectation that they will. Love is the magnificent, desperate hope we place in an impossible promise.
And from that collision of biological necessity and impossible illusion, the 12 flowers bloom. Some are obvious, like sexual desire. Nasio is uncompromising here. Without the friction of physical desire, the love of a couple devolves into a deep friendship.
The physical fire is the most crucial for a couple.
Then you have fantasy, admiration, narcissism, self-esteem, satisfaction, frustration. There are 12 in total. But a realistic bouquet must contain thorns. And Nasio's inclusion of these thorny flowers is where his theory becomes truly subversive.
The roses with thorns.
Exactly. Consider the flower of guilt. Nasio posits that feeling a sickening, profound guilt when you accidentally harm your partner is one of the absolute strongest indicators of true love. The depth of your remorse is the exact measurement of your attachment.
He also includes jealousy and the fear of abandonment, and I think this is where modern pop psychology really clashes with psychoanalytic reality. We are bombarded by messages that any form of jealousy is toxic, that we must be perfectly self-sufficient, completely whole, and entirely independent before we are worthy of a relationship.
This raises an important question for you, the listener. We are taught that jealousy and dependence are toxic. But Nasio says healthy dependence is the cement of love.
He vehemently rejects the modern narrative of hyper-independence. He views it as a defensive armor against the vulnerability of true intimacy. He argues that a baseline level of possessive jealousy is a completely normal, essential component of true attachment.
It's like the thorns on the rose are what actually anchor it to the ground. You need that immense weight, that relentless pull, to keep the moon in a stable orbit. To truly love is to willingly surrender your autonomy and submit to the terrifying reality of needing someone else to survive emotionally.
The bouquet must be bound tightly together by those thorny vines of dependence and fear.
But love's deepest risk is loss. What happens when the anchor of that gravity, the object of all those 12 complex emotional flowers, vanishes instantly? We turn to Chapter 6, the deeply tragic story of Helena, to explore the unending landscape of grief.
This is a narrative of such profound loss that it demands a moment of mental preparation. Helena spent years trapped in the agonizing cycle of unexplained infertility, years of invasive treatments, of fleeting hopes, and crushing disappointments.
And then the miracle occurs. She conceives. She carries the child to term. She joyfully births her beautiful, healthy baby boy, whom she names Enzo. It is the absolute zenith of human joy.
And then, 3 days later, while Enzo is in the hospital nursery and Helena is resting, he dies inexplicably. The cause is entirely unknown.
The psychological whiplash of falling from the absolute pinnacle of fulfilled desire into the darkest abyss of unimaginable loss. It's enough to fracture the human mind. When Helena finally enters Nasio's consulting room weeks later, she's described not merely as sad, but as a biological entity that has been entirely emptied of its soul.
Nasio is faced with a woman in total paralysis, and he must make a vital clinical distinction here between what Helena is enduring, which is profound, unadulterated mourning, and clinical depression or melancholia.
Right, mourning versus depression. To the untrained observer, they look the same.
They do. Overwhelming lethargy, endless weeping, the complete inability to engage with the world. But the internal psychological mechanics are radically different. In depression or melancholia, the ego itself is the casualty. The patient's self-esteem is destroyed. They develop self-hatred.
But in mourning, the self-esteem is preserved. Helena does not harbor self-hatred. She wishes to die not because she feels worthless, but because she is existing in a universe that has been abruptly emptied of all meaning. The world is emptied.
Yes. The object of her immense, newly formed maternal love has vanished, but the love itself is still surging through her with nowhere to land. We witness the visceral reality of this displaced love when Helena confesses to Nasio a deeply primal desire. She admits that she desperately wished the doctors had allowed her to keep her infant's lifeless body in her hospital bed.
She just wanted to sleep holding her dead baby.
Driven by an agonizing, irrational hope that she could somehow pour her own living, pulsing warmth back into his cold flesh.
It is a devastating image. And compounding this unimaginable agony is the fact that Helena is subjected to the absolute worst, most destructive advice from well-meaning but emotionally illiterate family members. They offer her platitudes like, have another child soon, you can try again.
That specific phrase is perhaps the most violent psychological assault you can inflict on a mourning parent, because it implies interchangeability. It implies that the lost child was merely a generic placeholder. To suggest replacing Enzo is to suggest erasing Enzo's unique existence.
So how does an analyst guide someone out of a paralysis that is fueled by loyalty to her lost son? What stands out is how Nasio just sat in the paralysis with her during that first return visit. He doesn't deploy brilliant theories.
He describes a physical sensation of his own bones separating, an attempt to physically match the unbearable weight of her emotional mutilation.
Empathy isn't always knowing what to say. Sometimes it's feeling the bones separating alongside the patient. It's a shared silence.
But slowly, over months of agonizing work, Nasio does orchestrate a subtle linguistic breakthrough. The topic of a potential future pregnancy eventually surfaces. And when it does, Nasio does not refer to this hypothetical child as a new baby. He specifically and deliberately refers to the future child as Enzo's brother or sister.
Enzo's brother or sister.
Uh-huh.
It completely alters the psychological geometry of Helena's family tree. By explicitly designating a future child as Enzo's sibling, Nasio permanently enshrines Enzo's existence in reality. He validates that Enzo's place as her first child was eternal and irreplaceable.
This simple linguistic validation liberates Helena. It allows her to contemplate generating life without feeling that she is betraying the son she lost. Grief is defined not as forgetting, but as the time needed to learn to love the absent person differently.
Helena lost her child, but what about children who lose their parents or are abandoned by them? To explore this, we move to Chapter 7 and the work of the legendary François Dolto.
Nasio dedicates a significant portion of the text to his mentor, François Dolto, who is an absolute titan, a pioneer in child psychoanalysis. Nasio recalls his time working alongside her at a public orphanage, a Pouponnière in Paris, dedicated to housing severely traumatized infants and toddlers.
And Dolto was revolutionary. Nasio endeavors to distill her secret to healing these shattered children. It wasn't about academic theory. It was her extraordinary ability to empty herself, step into the child's imaginary scene, and feel their exact emotional weight.
Child therapy is not just playing, it is playing to capture the unconscious.
There is no more harrowing demonstration of this than her encounter with this severely psychotic little girl named Huda. Huda was born of a violent rape and was residing in the orphanage in a state of perpetual agonizing torment. She spent her sessions screaming incoherently and violently, repeatedly beating her own head against the hard floor. It is deeply distressing, and Nasio and other students are in the room, silently observing the master at work. During one brutal session, Dolto kneels beside her, and Dolto, this revered legend, turns to her students, throws her hands open, and with complete transparency admits defeat. She says aloud, "I don't know what to say to help you."
It is the ultimate vulnerability.
Okay, let's unpack this. Dolto openly admits, "I don't know what to say." She embraces her weakness in front of her students. It's a masterclass in authenticity. She wasn't playing the all-knowing doctor. She was a fellow human in pain.
And it is precisely that humility that creates the vacuum necessary for the breakthrough. She keeps tuning her empathy to Huda's agonizing frequency. She realizes that in Huda's psychotic framework, her mother is a terrifying, omnipotent, bloodthirsty monster residing inside her mind, actively commanding Huda to destroy herself.
So how do you disarm a monster that only exists within a child's psychosis?
Dolto taps into the absolute core of the trauma, leans in, and delivers one perfectly calibrated sentence. She tells Huda, "Your mother is also a sad baby."
Your mother is also a sad baby. It's such a strange sentence, but it shatters the image of the monster mother in Huda's mind. Why does that specific phrase cure her self-harm?
Because a child's brain requires a villain to make sense of profound abuse. But by telling Huda that her mother wasn't a powerful, evil entity who targeted her out of hatred, but was rather a broken, sad infant herself, Dolto shatters the terrifying mythology. The villain is demoted to a victim, and the moment the monster dissolves, the command to self-destruct vanishes. Huda stops beating her head.
It is breathtaking. Dolto healed children, but what happens to the children who aren't healed? They grow up into adults doomed to repeat their unhealed trauma. This grim trajectory brings us to Chapter 8, the phenomena and the repetition compulsion.
Nasio illustrates this through two adults, Isabel and William, whose lives are destroyed by the compulsion to repeat past traumas. He introduces this concept by quoting Pindar. The past is the father of the future.
And Nasio explains the clinical mechanics. When a child suffers a trauma, that extreme emotion acts like a drug that the adult body unconsciously seeks to experience again and again.
It is literally an addiction to one's own suffering. We see this with Isabel. She is an intelligent, successful architect. Yet she is risking her entire life for a deeply degrading affair centered around extreme sadomasochism. Nasio uncovers that between the ages of 10 and 14, Isabel was trapped in a continuous, incestuous relationship with her older brother.
So her adult pursuit of sadomasochism is a direct repetition of the intense, shameful emotions of her childhood abuse.
Yes, she is unconsciously forcing herself back into the role of the terrified victim. And the case of William is perhaps even more disturbing. William is an antique dealer who suffers from explosive panic attacks, but only on his wedding days. He has fled from 3 different weddings.
But the flight is merely the public-facing symptom. The true pathology is his nightly ritual. He locks himself inside his antique shop, dials a phone sex line to have a woman hurl dehumanizing abuse at him, and while listening, he physically violates himself with a broom handle. It's horrifying.
Nasio traces this back to a primal scene burned into William's developing brain. As a young child, William repeatedly, helplessly witnessed his father savagely beating his mother. In the adult reenactment, William is endlessly restaging that living room floor. By violating himself, he embodies the sadistic father inflicting the pain and the masochistic mother receiving the abuse, while his conscious mind remains the paralyzed, terrified child witnessing the horror. He embodies all 3 at once.
So what does this mean for our free will? If our most intimate compulsions are pre-programmed repetitions of a trauma we suffered when we were powerless children, freedom isn't about choosing what happened to you. It's about choosing whether to accept and love the person your past made you. It's like being dealt a hand of cards. You can't change the cards, but psychoanalysis helps you stop playing the exact same losing hand.
And to break these adult repetitions, a psychoanalyst must meet the inner child directly, acting as a doctor of sadness, which Nasio explicitly details in Chapter 9, discussing his practice with actual children.
He pulls back the curtain on exactly how he conducts a first interview with a child. We meet Agatha, a 4-year-old rebel, and Kevin, an 8-year-old with insomnia.
Nasio emphasizes the technique of dissociation. The analyst must be present with the child while simultaneously splitting their mind to imagine the child's internal emotional state. He asserts that children are singular forces that transcend their parents. Parents must try to love the child they have, not the idealized child they dream of.
The physical setup is fascinating. The small table, the open-L pocket knife to sharpen pencils calmly, the mirror. And the test with Agatha is brilliant. She's brought in for throwing tantrums. Nasio asks her to simply close the door behind her, a test of anxiety. She calmly closes it, proving she feels fundamentally safe separating from her parents. Her disobedience is just healthy ego development.
But 8-year-old Kevin retires more detective work. Kevin has stopped sleeping. Nasio gets him alone, and Kevin breaks down, pointing to his cheek. It hurts here. Nasio deduces his insomnia is actually a mask for depression caused by school bullies who are beating him up.
And the way Nasio handles this, here's where it gets really interesting. Nasio doesn't just treat the child. He treats the bond between child and parent. He brings the parents into the room and makes them the subject of observation. With Kevin watching, Nasio asks the parents why they think Kevin isn't sleeping.
They offer superficial theories about diet or shyness. Nasio brilliantly aligns with Kevin against the parents' misunderstandings.
By having the child watch the parents answer questions, he instantly creates an alliance. They become a team. We share the truth. Now let's educate them. This profound, empathetic connection, stepping into another's mind to feel their pain, is not just for therapy. It is the very root of artistic creation and sublimation.
Which carries us to Chapter 10. Nasio takes us to an imaginary museum. On the left, Velázquez's portrait of Pope Innocent X from 1650. On the right, Francis Bacon's terrifying modern reinterpretation, Head VI, from 1949.
Nasio explains sublimation, not just as Freud's idea of redirecting sexual or aggressive energy, but as the transmission of the urge to create from the artwork to the spectator. Bacon was so obsessed with the Velázquez painting he painted 45 popes, despite never wanting to see the original in person.
Nasio uses his psychoanalytic empathy to step into Bacon's shoes. Bacon was an asthmatic homosexual man who loved the color of raw meat. Nasio deduces that Bacon didn't see a majestic pope. His asthmatic lungs saw a man suffocating in a glass box.
And his sexual gaze saw the shiny, salmon pink silk cape, not as fabric, but as raw flesh, specifically. the lubricated mucosa of a phallus.
Yes.
Shocking but profound. Nasio psychoanalyzes a painting by psychoanalyzing the painter's gaze. It proves his ultimate point. We project our own internal wounds, desires, and traumas onto the world.
And that is the overarching thesis. We constantly project our own internal lacerations onto the external world. We simply do not possess the capacity to see the world objectively. We only ever see the world as we are.
Which brings this entire deep dive to its emotional crescendo. We've traversed a landscape of immense suffering. From Mathieu at the school gate, to Helena in the nursery, to Bacon's canvas, what is the author's ultimate conclusion?
Nasio concludes that the goal of therapy and of life is to learn, little by little, to love what you have, love what you did, and love what you are. Remind yourself that inside every person, even monsters, even tormented artists, is an innocent child. And as Nasio concludes, quoting Bernanos, at the very moment we leave this life, we will all return to being that innocent child.
It's a profound thought to leave you with. We spend our adult lives trying to manage, hide, or escape the abandoned child, the sad baby, or the terrified witness inside us. But what if, as the text suggests at the very end, that inner child isn't a weakness we need to outgrow? What if that child is actually the purest treasury of life we possess, the very essence that will gather up our years and lead us home at the end of our lives?
It changes everything about how we view our own scars.
Thank you for joining this profound deep dive into the human unconscious. We hope you leave this exploration looking with a little more empathy at the neurotic, the grieving, and the child within yourself. Because ultimately, whether the truth of your own mind speaks or stays forever silent depends entirely on you. Do not enter without desire.